Hello, if you want to watch exclusive lemon content on What If Naruto, then go to my Boosty. The first link in the description here contains such hot stories for adults, such as what if Naruto was a daddy for Sarada, or Kushina and Mikoto vulgar Naruto mommies. Follow the link and enjoy. I'm waiting for you.
He could hear children playing in the street, the distant cadence of a Chunin examination match being announced from the arena, the comfortable noise of a village at peace, a village that was still standing because of him. A village full of people who knew his name now, who nodded at him when he passed, who sometimes reached out and touched his arm or shoulder as if confirming he was real, and then walked on. That was what no one had told him about being a hero, that it ended. Naruto-kun. Tuchi's voice was gentle from behind the counter. It'll get cold. Yeah. He picked up the chopsticks. Held them. Yeah, old man. Sorry. He ate mechanically. The broth tasted perfect, the way it always had, the way it had when he was 7 and eating alone at this counter because no one else would sit with him, the way it had when he was 12 and triumphant after his first real mission, the way it had on the night before he left for the war with an army at his back and a tailed beast in his gut. The ramen was constant. The ramen was reliable. He set down his chopsticks after half the bowl. Tuchi didn't comment. The walk home took him past the Hokage monument, and he stopped as he always did, looking up at the stone faces carved into the mountainside. 4 faces. Hashirama. Tobirama. Hiruzen. Minato. His father's face, still strange to think, looked back at him from the mountain with that carved serenity all the Hokages wore in stone. Naruto had memorized every line of it over the years, long before he knew the connection. Had once thrown a fit at 12 about how the 4th stone hair wasn't nearly cool enough. Now he stood beneath it, and tried to feel something. Kakashi's face would be up there soon. The sculptors were already taking measurements. Naruto had heard Irika mention it, casually, the way you mention something that is simply happening, simply true, simply the way things are. He was happy for Kakashi-sensei. He kept walking. The apartment was exactly as he'd left it, which was to say, a particular kind of organized chaos that only made sense to him. Scrolls stacked by application type. Spare kunai sorted by size on the windowsill. A battered orange book half hidden under a training manual, Jiraiya's, because burning it had never felt right. Mission reports in a stack by the door, all filed, all complete. He sat on the floor of his living room rather than the couch, because he'd been doing that lately without quite knowing why. Maybe because the floor didn't expect anything from him. The couch was where guests sat. The floor was just floor. Through the wall, he could hear his neighbor's kid learning to play the shamisen. It was not a good performance. The same 3 notes, over and over, slightly wrong each time, the child clearly convinced that repetition alone would eventually produce music. Naruto leaned his head back against the wall and listened, and something about it sat in his chest in a way he couldn't name. When did I stop knowing what to do next? It was not a new question, but it was a louder one lately. He'd spent his entire life with an answer to it: become Hokage, become Hokage, become Hokage, a destination that functioned as a compass, and without it, he was discovering that he didn't quite know how to navigate. The war was over. The village was saved. The people who needed saving were saved. He'd reached the end of every dream he'd been able to imagine. And now he was standing in the wreckage of accomplished goals, waiting to understand what came next. Sasuke was gone again. Not in the dark, tortured way of before. Naruto had saved him from that, at least, had dragged him back to the light with 2 broken arms and sheer bloody-minded refusal. But Sasuke had looked at the village, looked at his restored eyes, looked at Naruto for a long and complicated moment, and said quietly, "There are still things I need to do. Things that have to be done outside of Konoha." And then he was gone, and the absence of him was a specific shape, a Sasuke-shaped hole in Naruto's daily existence. Sakura had her hospital. Ino had her family's shop and Sai. Lee and Tenten had their teams. Naruto closed his eyes. Niji was gone in a way that was permanent. The shamisen through the wall hit the same wrong note again, and this time Naruto almost smiled. He slept eventually, fitfully, and in the dream he was running. Not the normal kind of running that featured so heavily in his subconscious. not sprinting towards something with his heart cracked open and his arms reaching, but directionless running. The ground was familiar at first, Konoha's rooftops, and then unfamiliar, some gray expanse, and then simply nothing, a void that had texture but no content. And he was running in it, and gradually slowing, and the slowing felt less like fatigue and more like the air thickening around him, becoming something else. He stopped, looked around. The void was not empty, he realized. It had depth. And at its periphery, barely visible, things moved, enormous shapes, suggestions of scale he couldn't process. The way you sometimes sense something in your peripheral vision that's gone the moment you turn. You are a long way from anywhere, said a voice. He turned. She was standing approximately 3 meters away, which was interesting because there had been nothing there a moment ago, and the nothing had offered no warning of her approach. She was tall, taller than him by a comfortable margin, with long silver hair that moved in a wind that wasn't blowing, dressed in a white and purple attendant's uniform that somehow suggested both servant and sovereign. She held a long thin staff lightly in one hand, the way you hold something that has been part of you so long you've forgotten it's there. Her eyes were extraordinary. Not in the way people mean when they say that about a pretty girl. They were extraordinary the way the ocean is, the sense that whatever is looking back at you has depth you cannot calculate, has seen things you do not have the context to imagine, has decided in a prior moment whether you are interesting or not, and will not be changing that assessment based on first impressions. She was looking at him like he was mildly interesting. Where am I? Naruto asked. His voice was steady. It surprised him. Between, she said. You pulled away from your dimension in your sleep. This is not uncommon in beings with significant dormant energy, though it usually resolves without anyone actually noticing the space between. She tilted her head slightly. You noticed. What does that mean? I pulled away, like I left my body? A part of you. The more interesting part, arguably. She was examining him with the same energy he'd seen Tsunade use when looking at a complicated medical chart, clinical, thorough, arriving at conclusions she had no intention of sharing yet. You have a tailed beast, not a question. 9 tails, he said. Yeah. Kurama, HM. She tilted her head the other direction. And you've reached a complete synchronization with it, 6-pad sage mode. Yeah, and yet here you are, drifting in the between space at. She glanced at something that wasn't there, in the manner of someone consulting a clock in a room without clocks. 2 in the morning, by your world's reckoning. Sleeping poorly. It was not, technically, a question about how he was doing. It was an observation, but something about the precision of it, the simple factual noting of here you are, in a state of mild dissolution, made his chest tighten in a way the careful sympathy of friends never quite did. The war ended, he said. I'm aware. I observed portions of it. Remarkable energy output. She sat down, not on anything, simply folded herself into a sitting position in the middle of the void, which obeyed her, the way everything probably obeyed her. Sit down, Naruto Uzumaki. You're making this space untidy by standing there radiating purposeless kinetic anxiety. He sat. The void was comfortable under him. Who are you? He asked. My name is Vados. I am an angel. She said this with the same inflection a person might say I am a doctor, a professional descriptor, a category. I serve as attendant to the god of destruction of Universe 6. Naruto processed this for a moment. Universe 6. There are 12 universes. Right. I can see from your expression that this is a significant recalibration. She did not seem bothered by this. Take a moment. He took a moment. Around them, the void continued being vast and quietly uninterested in their conversation. Okay, he said finally. 12 universes, she said again, as if he had passed the test by accepting the first statement well enough to receive the second. Each with a god of destruction, a supreme Kai, and an angel. The angels are attendants, administrators, guardians, trainers. We are considerably older and more powerful than the gods we serve, and considerably more patient, which is often the more useful quality. And you're here because I was in the area, she said. Which was, he would learn much later, her version of I sought you out specifically. I was observing your universe's recent events. The summoning of Hagoromo Otsutsuki's energy, the use of 6 pads chakra in combat. These things produce a specific resonance in the divine frequencies, the way a very large stone produces ripples proportional to its weight when dropped into water. She looked at him with those calculating eyes. You produce quite large ripples, Naruto Uzumaki. Is that a good thing? It is a notable thing. She paused. Which, for beings of my seniority, is considerably rarer and therefore more valuable than good. He looked at her for a moment, really looked. She was, objectively, the most otherworldly being he had ever seen, including Hagoromo himself, and the list of otherworldly beings he had encountered was not short. There was something about her stillness that read as compressed power rather than absence. The stillness of a river that's very deep, or a blade that hasn't moved yet. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because you are going to wake up in a few minutes, she said. And because I am considering a proposal, and it would be rude to make a proposal to someone without first introducing myself. She rose, smooth and unhurried, the void rearranging itself accommodatingly. But I don't make proposals to people who are asleep. It would be taking advantage. Naruto stood too. What kind of proposal? Something shifted in her expression, barely, a millimeter of something that might have been amusement on a face built for precision, the kind that answers the question you've been asking yourself for the past 3 months. The one that starts with when did I stop knowing what to do next? He stared at her. Wake up, Naruto Uzumaki, she said, and he did. He sat up so fast he nearly knocked over the glass of water on his nightstand. The apartment was gray with pre-dawn light. The shamisen had stopped. Somewhere outside, a bird, just one, the vanguard of morning, tested a single note. He sat with his hands in his lap and breathed. Dream. A dream. Except that his hands were steady rather than trembling, which was the opposite of how he usually woke up, and the dream had a texture to it, a solidity, a specificity, that his dreams didn't usually carry. He could still smell the void. Not a smell, exactly. More like the absence of familiar smells, which is its own sensation. He got up. Made tea. Stood at the window and watched Konoha wake up. By the time the sun was fully over the tree-line, he made a decision. He had training scheduled with Lee at noon, and a mission debrief at 3, and dinner with Irika at 7. Normal things. Real things. But something had shifted, small and tectonic, in the space between sleeping and waking. The weight that had been sitting in his chest since the war's end was still there, but it had changed shape. It felt less like grief and more like anticipation now, and he didn't know why, and he found he didn't need to, because he had, over the course of his life, developed an excellent working relationship with not knowing why but feeling the direction. He went to training. The meeting with Lee was good. Lee had developed 3 new variations on his primary gates technique and wanted Naruto's read on their combat applications. And Naruto threw himself into the analysis with a focus he hadn't felt in weeks, poking holes, suggesting adjustments, demonstrating counterplay until they were both sweaty and grinning in the middle of the training ground with the afternoon light coming through the trees sideways. You seem better, Lee observed, toweling off. Yeah? You have been looking. Lee searched for the diplomatic phrasing with the visible effort of someone who has learned that his natural instinct toward directness occasionally causes problems. Heavy. Lately. Naruto looked at him. Lee was, at his core, one of the purest people Naruto had ever known. Not naive, pure. The kind of pure that comes from committing utterly to a set of values and never compromising them, even when the world made that difficult, even when the body failed, even when no one was watching. I think something's coming, Naruto said. Lee looked around the empty training ground, immediately combat alert. Not like that. Naruto laughed. Not a threat. I don't know. Something. Lee considered this. Niji used to say, he paused, and the pause had Niji's weight in it. Niji used to say that destiny was not a straight line, that the moments before your path changed shape were often indistinguishable from waiting. He looked at Naruto steadily. He was irritating about it, because he was usually right. Naruto was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said. Yeah, he was. The mission debrief was routine. The dinner with Irika was good, grilled fish and sake and Irika talking about his students with the particular mix of exasperation and devotion that Naruto had always loved. About him, the love that didn't need to announce itself because it was just there, structural, load-bearing. Iruka looked at him over the sake cups and said, "You seem more like yourself today," and Naruto said, "Getting there," and meant it. He walked home under a clear sky. The stars were out, not as many as you could see in the wild, outside Konoha's light, but enough to see the broad river of the galaxy overhead, the casual incomprehensible scale of it. 12 universes, the voice from the dream had said. He stood on the bridge over the river that ran through town and looked up at the stars and tried to imagine 12 entire universes, and mostly failed. But he kept trying. It was 3 nights later when she came back. Not in a dream this time. He was awake, sitting on his roof at midnight, too restless for sleep, watching clouds move across the moon, when the air 3 meters to his left simply changed. Not a dramatic change, no flash of light, no sound. Just a subtle wrongness that resolved, over approximately 2 seconds, into the presence of a very tall woman in white and purple, standing beside him with the casual ease of someone who has never stood anywhere they weren't entirely entitled to be. "You're awake this time," Vados observed. Naruto stared at her. His hand had moved to a kunai automatically, had stopped when something deeper and more animal than combat training registered this entity is not something a kunai will help with, and now rested at his side, deliberately relaxed. "Yeah," he said. "I figured you'd come back." One elegant eyebrow moved approximately 3 millimeters. "Oh, whatever you said about a proposal. I've been thinking about it." He looked at her steadily. "I know that feeling. The one where you're circling something before you say it. I do it too, before I say something important." The eyebrow did not return to its default position. Something in her expression shifted, not warmth exactly, but the slight adjustment of an assessment being updated. She sat down on the roof beside him with the same gravity-optional ease as before, and for a moment they were both just sitting there, looking at the clouds and the moon. "There is a position available," she said at last. "God of Destruction. Of Universe 6, yes?" She said it without inflection. "The current God of Destruction, Kampa, has been evaluated. The Grand Priest, the father of all angels and the highest authority below the Omni King, has determined that Kampa has been derelict in his duties for what amounts to several geological eons. He eats, he sleeps. He occasionally blows things up out of pique rather than cosmic necessity. The balance of Universe 6 is suffering for it, and they want to replace him. They are considering the possibility of replacement. It is not without precedent, though it is rare." She looked at him sidelong. "I have been authorized to identify and evaluate potential candidates, and you looked at me. I observed the war. I observed your use of 6 paths energy, the nature of your tailed beast partnership, the manner in which you make decisions under duress." She paused. "I observed you trying to redeem Obito Uchiha while simultaneously fighting for your life. The capacity to hold both destruction and compassion at the same time, simultaneously and without contradiction. This is, in fact, the core competency of a god of destruction. Most candidates have one or the other. They are easy to find. Finding both is considerably rarer." Naruto was quiet for a moment. "What would it mean?" he asked. "If I did it. Became this. Training first. Approximately 1 year, by your world's reckoning, though time moves differently in the space we'd be working in. You would learn God Ki, a type of energy beyond anything in your current framework. You would learn the Hakai, the technique of unmade things, of returning matter and energy to the fundamental void. You would learn the philosophy and the responsibility." She paused. "It would not be easy. I have trained gods before. I will tell you honestly, most of them survived their training and became adequate. A few became good. One became genuinely remarkable." She looked at the moon. "I am curious which category you fall into, and if I survive? If I pass, then Universe 6 gets a new god of destruction, and you get a purpose commensurate with what you actually are." She said it simply, without flattery, which made it land harder than flattery would have. "You are not a village protector, Naruto Uzumaki. You have been operating at a scale your world cannot properly contain for some time. The war merely made it visible." He sat with that, thought about Konoha, about Iruka and Lee, and the kids he trained, and the ramen that was always getting cold, and the stone face on the mountain that would never be his face, and the Sasuke-shaped absence, and the feeling of running without direction. "What about the people here?" he asked. They will be safe. Konoha's protection does not require your personal presence. It hasn't, objectively, since you became stronger than every threat it faces combined. She said this with no cruelty. They will mourn your absence. That is different from requiring it. I'd be able to come back? Visit? Gods of destruction are not prisoners. Kampa spent half his tenure visiting Universe 7 to eat food. A pause. You could come back. He looked up at the stars, thought about 12 universes. About the vastness of a responsibility that matched the vastness of what was inside him. About the way Vados had said, I am curious which category you fall into, not I expect greatness from you, but I am curious. Which was somehow the more honest and more motivating thing. He thought about the void between, and the feeling he'd had waking from that first dream, small and tectonic. Okay, he said. Vados looked at him. I'll do it, he said. He met her extraordinary eyes. I'll train. I'll try to become whatever this needs me to be. He paused. But I want to understand what I'm doing. Not just how. Why? Every step. Something that was not quite a smile inhabited the corner of her mouth for a moment. That, she said, is already a better starting position than any god of destruction I have trained began with. She rose, and the air around her had that quality again, that sense of controlled enormity, of depth that wasn't advertising itself. I will return in 3 days to allow you time to arrange your affairs. Say what needs to be said. File whatever paperwork your village requires. A slight pause. Eat your ramen. While it's hot this time. She stepped off the roof. Not fell, stepped, as if there were a staircase there that had the courtesy to exist only for her, and was gone. Naruto sat on the roof for a long time afterward. The clouds moved across the moon. The river reflected the stars. The village made its quiet sleeping sounds around him. He turned the feeling over carefully, examining it, ready, not prepared. Preparation was logistics, and the logistics were terrifying, were 12 universes and God Key and the technique of unmade things. He was not prepared, but he was ready. The way a river is ready for rain, not knowing its exact shape, not knowing where it will be redirected, but poised, alive, with all the capacity in the world and a direction to pour it. He went inside. Made a list. Because even when destiny came knocking, some things required lists. Tell Irika. Spar with Lee, properly, goodbye properly. Visit Niji's memorial. Find Kakashi. Have the actual conversation, one last bowl of ramen. Sit with it. Eat the whole thing. He wrote the list carefully, tore it from the notebook, folded it, put it in his pocket. Then he went to sleep, deep sleep, dreamless for once, and in the morning, Konoha looked exactly as it always had, and for the first time in months, that felt not like an ending but like a beginning he was finally ready to walk away from. The paperwork for an indefinite leave of absence from Konoha required, it turned out, 7 separate forms. Naruto discovered this at 7 in the morning when he walked into the mission desk and asked Kotetsu, who was halfway through his first cup of tea and therefore technically not responsible for his reactions, for the relevant documentation. Kotetsu had looked at him for a long moment, set down the tea, and said, Indefinite how? Indefinite like. I don't know when I'll be back. I'll be back. But I don't know when. Kotetsu had looked at him for another long moment, then turned around and began pulling forms from a cabinet with the mechanical focus of a man who has decided that questions are above his pay grade. 7 forms. Emergency contact designation. Asset declaration. Mission status freeze. Medical information update. Chain of command notification, which required a separate form for each person in Naruto's command chain, and Naruto's command chain was, due to his particular position as a recently returned war hero with no formal assignment, both longer and more complicated than either of them expected. Security clearance suspension, and a form that Kotetsu slid across the counter last with an expression of mild personal suffering, titled, Informal Bureaucratic Script, Notice of Extended Non-Presence, Ninja Class A or above. Naruto stared at it. This is a form for telling the village a ninja exists but is currently somewhere else. It's also used for long-term undercover assignments, Kotetsu said, with the tone of a man constructing a small kindness. Right. Naruto picked up the pen. That's what this is then. Kakashi-sensei was harder. Not in the way Naruto had expected. Not an argument, not an interrogation, not a long silence full of complicated emotion. Kakashi had listened to the entire explanation. Universes, angels, god of destruction, training, indefinite timeline, with his one visible eye making slow, steady contact in the way that meant he was tracking everything and filing it carefully, and not yet decided what to do with it. When Naruto finished, Kakashi was quiet for a moment. This angel, he said finally. Vados. Yeah. She came to you? Yeah. You're certain she isn't? He seemed to weigh the options. Manipulating you for purposes that are not what they appear to be. Naruto thought about Vados standing on his roof, looking at the moon, saying, I am curious which category you fall into. The pragmatic honesty of it. The absence of flattery. The way her eyes held the quality of something very old that had chosen, for reasons of its own, to level with him. She didn't tell me I'd definitely succeed, he said. She told me she didn't know how it would go. That's not how you manipulate someone. Kakashi considered this. No, he said slowly. I suppose it isn't. Another silence. Through the window of the Hokage's office, Kakashi's office, Naruto noted for perhaps the 100th time, with the specific complicated feeling he had about it, Konoha spread out below, orderly and warm in the morning light. You've been struggling, Kakashi said. It wasn't a question. Naruto opened his mouth. You don't have to argue about it, Kakashi said. I've been watching you not eat your ramen. That's all I needed. Naruto closed his mouth. The world you saved is a good world, Kakashi said carefully. And it is also a world that is, for you specifically, at this specific size of power and purpose, perhaps not quite enough world. He looked at Naruto with that eye, the one that had seen Obito and Rin and Minato and 30 years of ninja history, and still looked at Naruto with something clear and unburdened. I think your father would have understood this. I think your mother would have told you that small cages make for sad birds regardless of how beautiful the cage is. Naruto's throat tightened. Go, Kakashi said simply. Do the thing. Become, a slight pause. A micro-expression that was, on Kakashi's face, the equivalent of someone else bursting out laughing. Become the god of destruction of Universe 6. Because apparently that is a sentence that makes sense in the world we live in now. He tilted his head. Come back when you can. Don't die. I never die. You've come alarmingly close several times. Statistically, the pattern is concerning. He picked up a document from his desk. Go file your 7 forms. Already did. The eye crinkled. Of course you did. The memorial stone was cold under his hand. He stood before it in the early afternoon, the village quiet around him, running his fingers over the carved names the way he had done before, reading them by touch, by memory. So many names? Each one a weight. Each one a story that had intersected with his and been cut short, while he kept going. Niji Hyuga. The letters were smooth. He traced them. I don't know if you can hear this, he said quietly. I know you'd probably say something sarcastic about the metaphysics of it. Or explain why it was inevitable that you couldn't hear it. And then I'd argue, and you'd get that look. He stopped. The afternoon light was gold in the trees. A leaf spiraled down and landed on the stone's base. I'm going somewhere, he said. Somewhere I didn't plan. I think that would have surprised you, the not planning part. The going anyway. He paused. Maybe not. Maybe you would have said it was destiny. He almost smiled. I would have told you destiny was something you make, and you would have looked at me like I was exhausting. And we would have both been right. He stood there for a while longer. The light moved. I'm going to come back, he said. But I wanted to say goodbye to you properly. Without an army around. Without a war. Just, his voice was steady, carefully. Just this. He took his hand off the stone, bowed, walked away. Iruka cried, which Naruto had anticipated, and then rallied magnificently, which Naruto had also anticipated, and ended up giving Naruto a speech about responsibility and potential that was functionally identical to 17 previous Iruka speeches but felt, in this specific moment, exactly right. He also packed a bento box. For the road, he said, and Naruto did not explain that where he was going the concept of road did not quite apply, and made Naruto promise 3 times to eat regularly and sleep enough, and then stood at the door of his apartment, and watched Naruto walk away with an expression that was sadness and pride in equal measure, perfectly balanced, the way Iruka always balanced things. Naruto turned at the end of the street and waved. Iruka waved back. The ramen was, for the record, consumed in its entirety. Tucci didn't ask questions. He sat a bowl of miso in front of Naruto and refilled it once without comment, and when Naruto finally set the chopsticks down and said, "Old man, I'm going away for a while," Tucci nodded like he'd been expecting it. "Away like a long mission?" he asked. "Away like, further than that. But I'll be back." Tucci was quiet for a moment. Then he reached under the counter and produced a small sealed container, the kind used for takeaway, though this one had clearly been prepared in advance. "Then take some for later," he said. "Dried ramen mix. I know it's not the same. But..." He pushed it across the counter. "In case you get somewhere cold and need something that feels like home." Naruto looked at it. Looked at Tucci, at the lines of his face, the flour still under his fingernails, the warmth in his eyes that had been consistent for as long as Naruto could remember. One of the earliest warmths, the warmth that had been there before almost any other. "Thank you," he said. "Not for the ramen." Tucci nodded. "Not about the ramen." She came back on the third day exactly, as promised. Naruto was ready. Pack on his back, not much, a shinobi's traveling kit, some personal items, the dried ramen, standing in the clearing outside the village where he and Kakashi had first trained together with bells and humiliation. He'd chosen it deliberately, for reasons he couldn't fully articulate. Something about returning to beginnings. Vados materialized beside him at precisely dawn, her silver hair catching the first light, her staff catching it differently, as if light and the staff had a specific understanding about how to interact. She looked at the pack. "Traveling kit?" she said. "Dried ramen?" "Don't judge me." "I don't judge," she said. "I observe and evaluate. There's a distinction." She looked at him with those calculating eyes and made, apparently, a rapid series of evaluations. "You've said your goodbyes." "Yeah, and you've decided." "I decided 3 days ago." He met her eyes. "I keep deciding. Every morning since, I decide again. That's how I do things." Something shifted in her expression, that tiny recalibration, the adjustment of an assessment being updated. "Yes," she said, as if confirming something she'd suspected. "That is, in fact, how gods of destruction do things. The continuous choice. Not the single commitment, but the daily recommitment." She turned. "Come. Where are we going?" "Between," she said. "Where we were before." But this time deliberately, and with full awareness. She glanced back at him. "Which means it will feel considerably different. Are you ready?" He looked at Konoha behind him. The gate visible through the tree-line. The stone faces on the mountain. The first smoke rising from the morning cook fires, the smell of bread, the distant bark of a dog. He breathed it in, turned forward. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go." The transition was not dramatic. That was the first surprise. He'd been expecting something. A rupture, a blaze of light, a feeling of crossing. What happened was closer to a skip, a single frame removed from the film of his perception, and then the clearing was gone and the between was there, surrounding them, vast and textureless and carrying that quality he'd noticed before, the sense of enormous things at the periphery. He staggered slightly on no ground. "Your inner ear is compensating for the absence of gravity reference," Vados said, already seated. How she was seated in a void with no floor, he still didn't understand, with the air of someone who has watched this reaction many times. "It will adjust." It adjusted. Slowly. He found his footing on nothing and stood in it with the determined ease of someone who has, at various points, fought in midair, on water, and on the surface of a giant toad. "Okay," he said. "I'm good. You adapted faster than expected." She noted this like a scientist noting a data point. The Nine-Tails chakra provides a secondary spatial reference, I suspect. Your body has an awareness of energy fields that substitutes for conventional proprioception. Sure. He looked around. So this is the between, one expression of it. The space that exists between dimensions, between universes, between the conceptual boundaries of what different realities have agreed about the nature of existence. She gestured, a wide, fluid motion that encompassed the totality of the void. The gods and angels use it for transit, for training, for certain kinds of large-scale work that would cause unacceptable collateral damage if performed within actual universes. Unacceptable like, what kind of damage? The kind where a mistake removes several star systems from existence, and requires a significant amount of awkward apologizing to the Supreme Kais. She met his eyes. Which has happened? Not with my pupils, but I have heard the stories. A pause. This is why we train here. Naruto looked at his hands. They looked exactly like his hands, same calluses, same scar from the Valley of the End, same knuckles that had been broken and healed so many times the skin had a particular texture. They felt the same, but around them, barely visible if he looked from the corners of his vision, there was something, a faint luminescence, a tremor in the air. What is that? He asked. Vados looked at his hands. That, she said, is the beginning of why you are here. She rose from her seated position and stood before him, and he understood, in the way you understand things that are larger than understanding, that her full presence had not been directed at him before. Not completely. There had been a politeness to her prior manner, a deliberate softening of what she actually was, so as not to overwhelm. Now she stood before him with a slight adjustment of that restraint, and the air changed in a way that wasn't temperature but registered as temperature, and his chakra, all of it, 9 tails and sage and 6 paths and the reserves that were frankly embarrassing in their scale, went very still and very quiet in the way a large animal goes quiet when something larger enters the room. There are several forms of energy in your cosmology, she said. Her voice was the same. Only the air was different. Chakra. Natural energy. What Hagoromo's children called sage energy. What Kagaya Otsutsuki carried as celestial chakra. These are real and significant. They are also, she paused. They are also what a river is, compared to the ocean. And God-ki is the ocean. God-ki is the ocean and the concept of ocean, and the will that decided ocean was something that should exist. She walked around him slowly, not circling, exactly, more like an examination that required multiple angles. It is not simply energy. It is intent at a cosmological scale. It is the difference between power and authority. Any sufficiently strong being can produce power. God-ki is the energy produced when a being accepts genuine, functional responsibility for the continuation and editing of existence itself. Naruto was quiet for a moment. That's why you said you needed someone who could hold both destruction and compassion at the same time, he said slowly. She stopped walking. Because destruction without responsibility is just violence, he continued. And compassion without the willingness to destroy anything is just being afraid to make hard choices. But holding both, that's what the job actually is. The power has to come from that middle place. Vados regarded him. Yes, she said. There was something in her voice that was not quite warmth but was adjacent to respect, and given what she was, respect was the more meaningful currency. Precisely that. The gods of destruction who fail, and there are more failures than the divine hierarchy officially acknowledges, fail because they find the middle place unsustainable. They drift toward one shore or the other. They become destroyers without philosophy, or philosophers without the will to act. She tilted her head. You arrived at this conclusion in approximately 30 seconds. I've had to hold those things together my whole life, he said simply. Not at a cosmic scale. But yeah? That's familiar territory. The void around them was quiet. At its edges, the enormous invisible presences continued their slow and indifferent movements. Then we have a foundation to work from, Vados said. Which is further than day one usually begins. She turned away from him. The examination concluded, the next phase beginning. There will be 3 stages to your training. The first is physical and energetic, the awakening and cultivation of God-ki, the basic techniques of divine combat, the Hawkeye in its elementary form. The second is philosophical, the deepening of your understanding of destruction as a cosmic function, the development of your judgment as a god of destruction, the ability to perceive the health and necessity state of complex systems. The third is ceremonial and political. The divine hierarchy is real and has rules, and you will need to navigate them. Which stage are we starting with? The physical stage. She glanced back at him. Because before we can do anything else, I need to know where you actually stand. And the only way to know where a fighter stands is to see them fight. She raised her staff. Come at me. Naruto blinked. Right now? Right now. I don't want to, I mean. You said you're more powerful than the gods you serve. I said angels are considerably more powerful than the gods we attend, yes. She held the staff loosely, the way she always held it. Habitual, structural. Come at me, Naruto. Full output. No hedging. He looked at her for a moment. Then he moved. The fight lasted 11 seconds. He came at her with wind-release enhanced speed, the kind that had broken the sound barrier since his early 20s, with a Rasengan in his right hand large enough to level a small building. In Sage mode because it was the fastest activation he could manage and because any serious engagement got Sage mode, non-negotiable. She was not there. Not moved, not there. Where she had been was empty air, and where she was behind him with the staff placed lightly against the back of his neck, the tip of it, and the touch of it sent a single frequency of energy through his entire nervous system that was not pain, exactly, but was a precise message to every cell in his body that it could, at its holder's discretion, be told to stop being cells. He froze. Good speed, Vado said. Good instincts. Your reaction to missing is to immediately go into multidirectional sensing rather than committing to a follow-through blind. That's advanced combat awareness, not universal even among your level of fighters. She removed the staff. But your God Ki is completely absent from that attack. Your chakra is extraordinary. It is also meaningless at the scale we are discussing. He turned to face her. His heart was going fast. Not from fear but from the familiar exhilaration of encountering something genuinely beyond his current parameters. He knew this feeling. He'd had it with Kakashi, with Jiraiya, with Sasuke, with Pain, with Madara. It was the feeling of the ceiling revealing itself, and beneath the humbling of it was something electric. Show me, he said. What God Ki looks like. Vados raised her free hand. What happened was subtle and total. A sphere of energy approximately the size of a marble formed above her palm. No light show, no dramatic build-up, no sound. It was simply suddenly there, and it was silver gold, and it was quiet, and looking at it made Naruto's own chakra press itself against his ribs from the inside like it was trying to get closer while also retreating, like a compass needle going insane near a magnet. This, Vados said, is God Ki at less than 1% of my working output. Naruto stared at the marble. Your chakra reacts to it, she observed. The Nine-Tails chakra specifically, it recognizes the frequency. This is significant. Most mortal energy is inert in the presence of God Ki. Yours is responding. She closed her fingers and it was gone. Which suggests the path from your current state to God Ki is shorter than it would be for most candidates. The Nine-Tails chakra has already been refined toward a divine frequency by your work with the six-pad sage energy. You are, in metaphysical terms, closer to the destination than you appear. How close? Months, rather than years, to first access. Years rather than decades to reliable control. She met his eyes. For reference, the last candidate I trained took 6 years to achieve first access. How long did it take him to reliable control? He never achieved it. She turned away. He became adequate, and was installed and has been adequate since. Kampa was, at his peak, adequate. Naruto watched her. And this other candidate? The one you mentioned before, he said carefully. The one who became genuinely remarkable. A pause. Long enough to have content. That, she said, without turning back, is a conversation for another stage of training. She began walking, across the void with the authority of someone who has decided that the void is the floor, and he fell into step behind her. For now, we will establish your baseline. I will observe your chakra systems in detail. I will determine the specific refinement techniques that will work with your existing energy architecture. And you will meditate. For how long? Until something shifts. She glanced back at him. Or until I tell you to stop. Whichever comes first. What does something shifts mean? You will know it when it happens. A pause. This is not mysticism. It's simply a description that is more accurate than any technical alternative. The awakening of God Ki is experiential. It either happens or it doesn't. Her voice was perfectly level. My job is to create the conditions under which it can happen. Your job is to be sufficiently open, sufficiently aware, and sufficiently yourself to let it. Naruto thought about this. Sufficiently myself, he repeated. This is, historically, the hardest part, Vados said. Most candidates spend the first months trying to be what they think a god of destruction should be. Trying to embody some prior idea of divine power. It never works. God Ki cannot be performed into existence. It has to be arrived at genuinely, from the specific and irreplaceable shape of who you actually are. She stopped walking. Turned to face him fully. Which is why I came to you specifically, Naruto Uzumaki. Because who you actually are is, from a technical standpoint, an unusually good shape for what we need. He looked at her in the silver-gold light of whatever lit the between. You're not good at compliments, he said. Her eyebrow did the thing. I don't give compliments. I give assessments. Yeah, but your assessments are nicer than you make them sound. A silence. And then, barely, the way a single thread of color appears at the horizon before dawn, something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile. A precursor to a smile, the expression's quiet overture. Sit down, she said. And begin. He sat, crossed his legs on the non-floor of the between, closed his eyes, breathed in. The void was enormous around him. At its edges, invisible presences moved like weather. Inside his chest, the nine-tails chakra moved in its familiar tidal rhythm, the warmth of Kurama, the living pulse of it, the partnership that had been forged in blood and understanding and was now simply him, an inseparable part of his fundamental nature. Inside that, the quieter resonance of sage energy. And inside that, deeper still, in the place where his sense of self was most essential and most quiet, something very faintly silvered, like a star behind clouds. Like a frequency just at the edge of hearing, he reached toward it. Carefully. The way you reach towards something you don't want to startle. It didn't startle. It stayed. Small and very far away and utterly patient. He breathed. He reached. He could feel Vados watching him, not a feeling of being observed, but a feeling of being witnessed, which was different. Being observed meant someone was collecting data. Being witnessed meant someone was present with you, attending to the actual fact of you, in the specific moment of your actual existence. He hadn't been witnessed in a long time. He breathed it in along with everything else, and in the enormous quiet of the between, with the void stretching in every direction and 12 universes spinning somewhere beyond its edges, Uzumaki Naruto sat perfectly still and began the long work of becoming something the universe had never had before. That night, or what passed for night in the between, a slight dimming that Vados mentioned was a feature she had introduced because beings with diurnal rhythms found the transition easier. He sat with his back against nothing and ate Tuchi's dried ramen cold, because there was no hot water. It was terrible. He ate every bite. Vados watched him from across the void with an expression he couldn't read yet. He would learn, later, to read it, would learn that it was the specific face of someone encountering something they had not expected and deciding, quietly, that the unexpected thing was good. What? He said. Nothing, she said. Sleep. We begin properly tomorrow. He lay back on the non-floor of the between, looking up at the non-ceiling that was also somehow full of light, and thought about 12 universes and the silver thread inside him that had stayed when he reached for it. He was asleep in 4 minutes. Vados remained where she was, and looked at him for a long moment, and consulted, privately, the portion of herself that kept careful records and made careful predictions and had, in its millions of years of operation, rarely been surprised. It was surprised now. She factored this into the calculations and returned to her work. The first week nearly killed him. Not literally. Vados was precise enough in her calibration that literally was never quite on the table. But in the way that the worst training of his life had always nearly killed him. The way Jiraiya's cliff had nearly killed him. The way the waterfall had nearly killed him. The way every real threshold he'd ever crossed had required him to go so far past his edge that his edge stopped being a meaningful concept. It started at dawn, the between's approximation of dawn, that slight brightening Vados had implemented for his benefit, with what she called baseline establishment. Stand here, she said. He stood. Release your chakra. All of it. No technique. No form. Simply, open. He'd done this before. The full release, the suppression of the instinct that every shinobi developed over years of training, the instinct to contain. Chakra was dangerous uncontrolled. Every academy lesson said so. He'd spent his entire childhood being told his inability to contain his chakra was a failing, a liability, a reason for the other kids to keep their distance. He opened. The between moved, not dramatically. A pressure change, a ripple at its edges, the invisible enormities at its periphery shifting their attention the way large animals shift when something interesting happens nearby. His chakra poured out of him and filled the space, and the space was large enough to hold it without complaint, and for the first time in his life he understood, viscerally, bone deep, that he had never actually been fully open before. There had always been walls, not suppressors, walls that he'd built himself, unconsciously, because every environment he'd ever existed in had been too small, and the thing inside him had learned to fold itself to fit. Here, it unfolded. He stood in the middle of his own chakra and felt the true scale of it for the first time, and it was terrifying and it was glorious, and his knees went slightly weak not from exertion but from the sensation of recognizing something vast as yourself. Vados watched from 10 meters away. She had produced a small notebook, actual paper, a thin silver pen, and was writing in it with the focus of a scientist recording something significant. How long has it been since you allowed a full release? She asked without looking up. Never, he said. His voice was steady. He was proud of that. She looked up. Never, she repeated. There's always someone nearby. Always something to damage. He breathed carefully, containing himself again, the folding, the automatic compression. Konoha's not built for full nine-tails output. She looked at him for a long moment. Then wrote something in the notebook. This explains several things, she said. Like what? Like why your God key access point is deeper than expected. The energy has been pressurized. She closed the notebook. Compressed for years. Decades. It has been. She searched for the word with the slight impatience of someone for whom language was usually adequate. Cured. Like metal under sustained pressure, what should have been raw power has been forced, by circumstance and necessity, into a denser and more refined form. She looked at him with those evaluating eyes. Your entire life, the fact that you were too large for your container, which you experienced as a problem, was actually the most important thing that could have happened to you. Naruto stood with that. That's either the most comforting thing anyone's ever said to me, he said slowly, or the most deeply annoying. Why would it be annoying? Because it means all those years of being too much were preparation. She tilted her head. Yes. I'm aware that's complicated. We can discuss the psychological dimensions later. For now, she raised her staff. Again. Full release. But this time, I want you to find the thread. The silver thing? From meditation? It is not silver, she said. That is simply how your mind interprets it because it's the closest frame of reference available to you. It is, in fact, a frequency, the first harmonic of God key resonating against your existing energy. It will feel silver because your chakra has a warm quality, yellow, orange, the fox's fire, and God key is cool. The contrast presents as silver. She said all of this with the tone of someone who has explained the color blue to many people who have only ever seen orange. Find the thread and reach for it while fully open. Don't pull. Reach. What's the difference? Pulling implies force. God key cannot be compelled. It can only be invited. A pause. Think of it less like grasping a tool and more like extending a hand to something that will decide whether to take it. He thought of Kurama. The first real handshake in the dark of his own mind, the moment he'd stopped trying to dominate the nine-tails and simply been present with it instead. That, okay, he said. I've done something like this before. I know. It's why I believe you can do this at all. He opened again. Found the thread, silver cool, patient, impossibly deep, and reached. It didn't come. He reached further. Carefully, the way she'd said. Not pulling. It flickered. There. A response. Not much. The thread didn't move toward him, but it acknowledged the reach, the way a sleeping thing shifts when you sit beside it without waking it. A change in its quality, the faintest warmth at its edges. I felt something, he said. I know. I saw it. She was writing again. That's day one. We're done with this exercise. He blinked. That's it. For this exercise, yes? She looked up. We will repeat it every morning. Each time you will get slightly closer. This is not a process that can be rushed. She set the notebook aside. Now. Combat training. What kind? She raised her staff and hit him with it. The staff, it turned out, was not primarily a weapon, it was a teaching tool. Each impact, and there were, over the course of that first week, a truly remarkable number of impacts, carried a specific frequency of energy that was calibrated to whatever lesson she was currently delivering. A hit on the shoulder that corrected his guard position left the correct position as a sensation memory in his muscles. A hit on the sternum that followed a moment of hesitation left a residual feeling of the cost of hesitation. Not pain, but a precise understanding of what the hesitation had opened him up to. It was the most efficient combat pedagogy he'd ever experienced, and he hated it with a passion he normally reserved for people who had threatened people he loved. "You're angry," she observed on day 3, after a session that had left him sitting on the non-floor of the between with his hands pressed flat against it, breathing through his teeth. "I'm fine." "You are demonstrably not fine. Your chakra is the color of a forest fire." She sat across from him, unconcerned. "Tell me why." "Because," he stopped. Breathed. "Because I can't touch you. I can't. I've been fighting my whole life and I cannot land a single hit, and I know that's the point. I know you're trying to show me where I need to go, but your entire identity is built on the belief that effort and refusal to quit are sufficient," she said. He looked at her. "This is not a criticism," she said carefully. "It has been, in the context of your life, almost universally true. Effort and refusal to quit have been sufficient. They were sufficient against Gaara, against pain, against Obito, against Madara, against Kagaya. The pattern has been confirmed so many times that it has become not just a strategy but a conviction, a load-bearing belief about the nature of reality." She set her staff across her knees. "But God Ki does not respond to effort and refusal. It responds to understanding. And understanding requires, first, the willingness to be insufficient, to sit in the insufficiency, to learn from it rather than fight it." He was quiet for a moment. "You're saying I have to stop punching." "I am saying you have to stop defining the fight as something you win by punching." She looked at him steadily. "There will be a time, soon, actually, sooner than I expected, when your physical capabilities will be relevant again. When God Ki is operational in your system, your combat output will be beyond anything you've previously experienced. The punching will matter again." A pause. "But right now, the most important thing you can do in combat training is lose. Specifically and informedly. Learn the shape of your current limitations so that when we address them, you understand what we're addressing." Naruto sat with this. Thought about Jiraiya, who had thrown him off a cliff and let him fall on the theory that necessity would unlock the fox. Had been right. But had also been right because Naruto had been willing to fall, had committed to the fall, had stopped fighting it and used it. "So I need to fall," he said. "For now." She rose. "Come. 2 more hours." He stood. "Vados." She looked back. "The remarkable one," he said. "The candidate. You still haven't told me." Her expression did the thing, the micro-adjustment, the updated assessment. "No," she said. "I haven't. Will you?" A pause. "Eventually," she said. And turned away. By the end of week 2, something had changed in his movement. He couldn't have described it precisely. Vados described it as spatial integration, his body beginning to operate in the between as naturally as it operated in the physical world, the absence of environmental references no longer registering as disorientation but as a neutral condition. He stopped losing his footing on nothing. Stopped instinctively bracing for wind. His senses, which had been subtly mistranslating the between's non-inputs as something was wrong, recalibrated. And then, on the morning of day 15, during the reach exercise, the thread moved. Not much. Not toward him, exactly, more like rotating to face him. But the change was unmistakable. It had been a static signal, a lighthouse in fog, and now it was oriented. Present, aware of him in a way it hadn't been before. He opened his eyes. Vados was watching him with the notebook closed. "You felt that," she said. "It looked at me," he said. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "That is, faster than my projections accounted for." She said this with a specific expression that he was beginning to learn, the expression she made when reality exceeded her models, which was an expression of what seemed like genuine pleasure.